as we keep going, and as long as you just keep people muted as they join, I think that's easy.
All right, great. So I'll do a little intro. And so the first thing is welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming on board tonight. And I know this is such a very busy time of school, and I'm sure you're all very relieved that school is finishing finally this really trying and challenging year. I am really honored that Amy agreed to come and talk with us, me tonight. I'll give you a little bio in a second, but I know she and I have done many co-presentations together, and she's always a very sought after speaker. So a little bit of a background and bio. She is a senior counselor at Collegewise, which is a national organization, and she has a very detailed and deep understanding of the college admissions process. She's very attuned and attentive to trends in education, as well as she really is all about fit in terms of what school is right for your student, a student. She has a master's degree in counseling from Villanova, and she's had 20 years, more than 20 years of experience as a college counselor, and has helped herself over 1,000 kids. You know, from the beginning to the end, from what classes they should take to what kinds of essays they should write, to helping them make their final selection and to celebrating with them. Amy lives in Westport with her family and 2 teenage kids. So Amy, thank you so much. I couldn't be more thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. So happy to be here. So I am just going to dive right in. I think is the best thing to do. I want to thank everybody for being here. I love answering questions. So these presentations are great. Couple kind of housekeeping things. I can't see you, which is painful for me because I like to see people. But the only way we can share our screen and present is for me not to be able to see you. So if you do have questions as we're going through, I know Michelle's going to keep everybody muted, and you can have your camera on and off because I can't see you anyway. But if you have questions, you can drop them into the chat box. And if you're new to Zoom, that's okay. If you kind of hover on the bottom of your screen, there's a box that says chat, and you can type your question in there. Michelle's going to collect them. If she needs to stop me because we're getting questions about something we're talking about, she will do that. Otherwise, I'll kind of go through the presentation and leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So, because I love questions, those are my favorite part. But I've put together a little bit of information for you guys tonight, kind of focusing on the college admissions process, kind of the journey, and a lot of questions that we hear all the time at Collegewise. So I'm just going to kind of jump right in. And really important to kind of understand what we're going to do tonight is to know where we're going together. So we're going to talk about the state of college admissions. Where are we now, especially after a COVID year? Some things have changed. A lot has not changed as well, which is comforting for people like me. We're going to talk about the parts of the application and why that's important, even if you have an 8th or 9th grader, understanding what's coming down the line. And especially for if you have a junior who's getting ready to fill out their applications this summer, early next year, kind of the parts of the application are important. And then also something that is really important to me is about kind of character in the application process, and quite frankly, in life in general, but really how there's some amazing research that's happening, specifically through the Making Caring Common project, through the education school at Harvard University, and how that's tying into admissions today, and how we're seeing that over and over, not just in highly selective college admissions, but across the board in admissions. It's no longer just about their grades and test scores, just to make life even more confusing for them and for us as parents. And then just because we're close is summer. I get so many questions about it's COVID. I can't do what I thought I was going to do. What's a good summer look like? So I'm definitely going to touch on that a little bit. And give you tons and tons of resources. For those who joined us, right before we got started, I had said to Michelle, we'll make sure that this deck is available. We can email it to everybody who registered. So no reason for you to have to take notes. You can just listen to me and ask your questions if you have them. So let's get started with kind of the state of college admissions. And this is the good news, by the way. I want you to look at this graph and this big blue piece of the puzzle. If you can't see this, I have bad eyes now, but the big piece of the puzzle are that the good news is that most colleges in the United States accept at least half of the people who apply. So that drama and that the chitter chatter at, parents talking amongst themselves, oh, no one's getting in. Yes, they are. They are getting in. They're getting into the majority of colleges. There's a little tiny sliver of the pie where, yes, college admissions is very, very, very competitive. And so if we look at this, the red sliver are colleges accepting less than 20% of their applicants. That means 80% of the kids who apply get rejected. And then the green slice is a little bit larger. That's colleges accepting 30 to 40% of their applicants. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. As a college counselor, parents come to me, students come to me. A lot of the schools that kids are looking at fall into that green and yellow kind of sliver. So I don't want to be flippant and say, oh, there's many schools everyone can get into. There are, but I also know what a lot of families are looking for, and they fall in that smaller piece of the puzzle. So we're going to talk about that. I love a good reality check, and I'm kind of obsessed with numbers. So I want you, this is a really great graphic. I love this. Okay. So if you look in the top right-hand corner, there's 33,800 high schools in the United States. That means there's 33,800 valedictorians in the United States. I mean, some schools have more than that, but for argument's sake, let's say there's one valedictorian, one first in the class at every high school. That means there's also 33,800 senior class presidents. There's probably 33,800 captains of the soccer team, right? All amazing, wonderful accomplishments. But I want you to look at that next, the second to the bottom orange bar. The total Ivy League spots, first-year spots for freshmen at all the Ivy League institutions is only 14,536. So again, we've got 33,800 very top of the class, highest GPA, most highly achieved student arguably in the high school, but there's still not enough spots. Take that another step further. Harvard's first year class only has 1,650 spots. So when I have parents call me, or you might hear at a cocktail party or at the beach with some friends, and parents are saying, oh, can you believe it? The valedictorian didn't get into Harvard. Yes. Look at the numbers. It's not actually that crazy to think about. Or this student who had a 4.8 GPA didn't get into Dartmouth. Of course they didn't. There's not enough spots for the number of qualified students that we have. So that's where the news isn't necessarily that great. But if you think about this in terms of admissions, in terms of all the schools and all the spots that are available, a lot of times, many families are just thinking of this very small group of only 14,000 spots in the whole freshman class. So the good news is that most colleges accept about 2/3 of their applicants. Amazing news. That means if you have a really balanced college list, meaning not all reach schools, you can't choose only highly selective schools on your child's list, good chance they're not going to get into many of them. The bad news is that there's about 40 highly selective schools in the entire United States that accept less than 10% of their applicants. That is not good news, but there's only 40. By the way, I wrote this number down. It seems to change all the time. We have openings and closings of schools. There's 2,330 undergraduate colleges and universities in the United States. So only 40 of those out of the whole 2,330 accept less than 10% of their applicants. Take this a step further. We looked at admissions numbers for this year. Brown University, it's one I looked up because I had some kids who applied. One was who was accepted there this year. Their acceptance rate this year was 5%. 5%. That means anyone who applied to Brown this year had a 95% chance of not being accepted. And the reality is probably 90% of the kids who applied were very qualified and would make great additions to the Brown freshman class. It's just not how it happened. So that's kind of that's the bad news in college admissions. By the way, you guys, this didn't change because of COVID. It was like this before COVID as well. So I don't want people to get confused and say, oh, COVID made it harder to get into college. It's not true. These numbers have stayed very consistent, even over the last 2 years. The big takeaways here are that you need to have a balanced college list, meaning there have to be schools on your child's list that are safeties, that they fit within the range that there's a good chance of them being accepted. Target schools, which are, again, they're in the range, but it could be a little bit of a toss-up depending on what those schools are looking for in that particular year. And then reaches. And those are schools where most people are not accepted at those schools. So you want to have, people say, is there a perfect number? I'd love to see a child apply to anywhere from like 8 to 10, 12, maybe. Anything more than 12 starts to get unmanageable. You can't do a great job. And we'll talk about the application tonight. You can't really do a great job. You can't really show demonstrated interest. You can't really connect with admissions officers. You don't really have time to write amazing essays when we start hearing kids apply to 15, 20, 25 different colleges. You just water down the product, is what ends up happening. And most important for me, and I truly believe this after 20 years of doing this work, great college experiences happen everywhere. And it's a big part of our mission at Collegewise that we really want students to focus more on what they're going to do when they get to college instead of the name of the school. That's, again, I have students who apply and get into some of the most highly selective colleges in this country, but the goal is not to get to that school. The goal is to find a program and a really good fit. And again, no matter where you go, it's going to be what you do when you get there. It's a great life lesson as well, but it really applies in college admissions. So that's kind of the state of college admissions. Now I want to talk about the different parts of the application and the most important parts of the application. So we're going to start with the most important part of the application, which is the transcript. So your transcript is your child's academic record for all 3 years of high school. And I say 3 because the transcript that's going to be submitted to a college is only going to include 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. The end of 11th grade, the GPA that your child has at the end of 11th grade, the classes that they've taken up until the end of 11th grade is what will actually be submitted to a college when they apply in the fall of their senior year. The reason you don't have senior grades when you apply to a college is because they haven't happened yet. You haven't been in class long enough. For most students, the first quarter is kind of just ended by the time they're submitting their applications. The classes that you take in senior year are important as well. That would also be listed on the transcript. There wouldn't be any grades on there. So within the transcript, there's kind of these 3 parts of a transcript. One is the course rigor. So these are the kind of classes your child has taken. Are they in traditional college prep classes? Are they in honors level classes? Are they in AP classes? And a lot of that is determined on what they're doing in their classes, teacher recommendations year after year, and what's expected, at their high school. Why this is really important is because the more selective colleges, remember that piece, that very small piece of the puzzle that we were looking at, kind of the green and the red pieces. At these schools, the course rigor and love of learning is more important than ever because there's an expectation at these colleges that your son or daughter has found something that they really are interested in. Doesn't mean they need to know a major, but I'm a parent of high school students as teenagers, as Michelle said. I have one child who loves math, loves math. I think she thinks in numbers, amazing. The other one, I'm not even really sure if he knows his times tables. I'm not kidding, right? He just is not a math person. So it probably wouldn't make sense for the child who doesn't love math to be taking honors or AP math classes, right? And so the rigor, we want to see that increase year to year as your child is in what your child is most interested in. And hopefully that's reflected then in their grades. So if I love something and I'm excited about learning about it, those where the highest grades would show up. Hoping A's and B's would be ideal. Here's a little secret. Colleges don't like C's on a transcript. I mean, in a class, fine. Colleges will never see that, but your final grade for the year, colleges don't love C's because a C says to a college, did they learn anything? Are they confident about this? We don't really know where they stand here. Was the work too hard? Was it too much for them? So C's create a lot of question marks and uncertainty for colleges. So we try to stay away from those. If your child has already gotten a C on their transcript, it's okay. Remember, there's lots of colleges out there, but as a general rule of thumb, we're not a fan of seeing a lot of those C's. My next bullet point, I said senior grades count. And this is important because there are different timelines that students will apply to college. And if Michelle will have me back, we could do an entire webinar just about senior year and planning a timeline and submitting applications. But just for the purposes tonight, there are many students who will apply early decision or early action to a school, meaning their applications are actually submitted to the college between October 15th and November 15th of senior year. And some of those students will get decisions very quickly, by December, early January. But there's also a lot of students who are deferred in their senior year, maybe in that first round of applications. And for those schools, they will require January grades. So at the end of the first semester, they will require those from students. So when I meet with seniors and they're like, it's cool, I did really good, but it's senior year, I can kind of like take a break, right? And I'm like, oh, can we make it through first semester and then you can take a breath? Because you won't know if you have to submit your grades or not senior year until well into after the first marking period. Then it's too late to catch up on that stuff. So that's why grades are really important. The classes that you're taking, making sure you have an understanding, making sure you're connecting with your teachers. If you need a bit of tutoring, get it in the first semester of senior year, because those grades are so important during that time. And then this last bullet, which I love, again, could talk about this all night long, is interest in learning is more important than GPA. Okay, with a caveat here, okay? A student who has a 1.5 GPA but has a massive interest in learning, I'm sorry, that 1.5 GPA is gonna bog you down. We're talking about a D average, a C plus or a D average, right? So that not so great. The interest in learning is really important. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more tonight in terms of how do you show that on your application and how do you get involved in things to show that interest in learning. But the transcript is when people say, what's the most important part of the application? It's the transcript. The grades that your child gets in high school are very, very, very important. The courses that they take in high school are very, very, very important. That's a big entry point to families in our program when it's course selection time, because it is such an important part of this process. And making sure your students are doing what's appropriate for them on their level. Please do not walk away saying, Amy said my kid should take all honors and AP classes. I did not say that. If that is the level that your child is at, of course we want them to be challenging themselves, but we're talking about challenging themselves in the best possible way for them. One question I get a lot is, what's better for my child to take an AP class and get a B, or an honors class and get an A, or a college prep level class and get an A? Well, the answer is we really want them to take an AP class and get an A. But if you can't do that, we still would rather them take an AP class and get a B, because it's showing a desire. It's showing that love of learning. It's showing the fact that you want to do a little bit more than kind of like the minimum of what's, required at the school. Now, I did not say take an AP class and get a C. That is never okay. In that instance, we would want you to be taking the college prep or the honors level class and get an A in that class to, again, just show what you're capable of doing. Okay, next part. Oh, test scores, my favorite. Okay, so this is a big issue. And thanks to COVID, it is absolutely blown up this year, caused a lot of student stress. If you have a child who is a junior or even a senior, that testing and COVID just did not mix. And we had lots and lots of students who were prepping and ready to take an SAT or ACT, and then were not able to, or tests are still being canceled, if you can believe it. I just read a huge article yesterday. Almost 100 schools canceled their SAT test that were supposed to be happening in California. So again, this is, oh, what a nightmare for these poor students. But couple of important points to remember here. There's two tests, the ACT or the SAT. They're different kinds of tests, but they're supposed to test the same thing. every college in this country will accept either test. So gone are the days that one is better than the other. That's not a real thing anymore, like it was when I went to school. So either test is okay. For a lot of students, getting the help and the guidance in terms of which is the best test for them is really the first step in this process. One thing I always say is for the most selective schools, let's talk about those Ivy League schools that are accepting less than 10% of their applicants. Test scores will never get you into those schools. So this is a big myth. Families might say to me, oh, my child got a perfect 1600 on the SAT. Do you guys remember that the orange bar graph where we talked about the number of spots? There's lots of kids who get perfect scores on the SAT. That's not going to be the thing that gets them into that, to one of those most highly selective schools. If they're not high enough and you submit them, they can absolutely keep you out. So for example, if you were applied to, I'm going to think of a highly selective school right up the street from us, Yale, and you had a perfect 1600 on the SAT or a perfect 36 on the ACT, that does not guarantee you admission. You definitely would be kept in the pool. They'd look at your whole application. They'd read all your essays. They'd read your letters of recommendation, because that's impressive to get a perfect score. Doesn't guarantee you a spot. The same exact applicant, the same test scores, letters of recommendation, etc., who let's say got a 1300 on the SAT or got a 30 on the ACT, those test scores would keep you out of Yale because there's too many qualified people with perfect test scores or much higher test scores that would have applied, that would have gotten those spots. Because the test optional piece that was introduced in a big way over the last year, the test scores don't actually mean as much as they used to. So here is my advice. It's a little controversial. I stand by it though, as do all my colleagues at Collegewise. In terms of preparing for a test and taking a test, this is where you have to know your child. Just like I mentioned, my own kids, not a math kid. I have one of both. I also have one of my children is an amazing standardized test taker. Amazing, great. She just gets it. She gets it. No anxiety. She's good to go. The other one, very stressed out, doesn't ever do very well on standardized test. So even knowing my own children, and my recommendation to you and your children, I've got one who would probably take the SAT or ACT, and one who I would just say, look, let's just look at some test optional schools, because why am I going to stress my child out? Why am I going to spend thousands of dollars on test prep for a child who's not a great test taker when there are currently over 1,400 colleges in this country that are test optional? Over 60% of the colleges in the United States right now are test optional. That is a lot of choices, including most of those most highly selective colleges have already announced their test optional for the coming year. So gone are the days where everybody had to take the test. That used to be our advice. Just try it. And then if your scores aren't good, we'll find test optional schools. Now we're saying, hey, if you're a great test taker, if you're really good at doing test prep, try it out. Let's see how you do. And if your scores are great, we're going to submit them. If they're not so great, we won't. Also, depending on your list. So I have many students who in this last admission cycle, they might have submitted tests to 3 or 4 of their schools. And for 3 or 4 of them, they might have not submitted their scores. Just depends on the selectivity and kind of what the average scores were for that particular school. So an important thing to look, and all this stuff you can Google, what are average test scores at the particular schools you're looking at? Do they super score, which is when colleges can combine the different scores from different sittings of a test? And are they required? So some colleges might still require a test. Are they recommended? Or are they not considered at all? So big news. It was last year as well, but the UC schools just announced, I think it's been about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, that they will be test blind, which is another term maybe you haven't heard yet, test blind for the class of 2022. So test blind means even if you submitted that perfect SAT score, they can't see it. Submitted that near perfect ACT score, they can't see it. They will not use test scores in considering students for admission. So the UC schools, by the way, UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC San Diego, these are big schools people have heard of before, completely test blind. So again, this is a pretty individualized decision for families to make. Definitely talk to your school counselor, talk to a college counselor, get some advice before kind of making that final decision for your particular student, but it's definitely something to consider. And it's awesome to know that you have choices and your kids have choices. I don't have a slide up here, but I'm going to ask Michelle can put this in the chat, and then I can include it on the new one that we'll send out to everybody. But a great website, if you want to know what those 1,600 colleges are, you can go to fairtest.org. So FAIR test.org. And this is a website that's constantly updated. I think they update it every 2 or 3 days with new schools that are added. And it will differentiate between test blind or test optional, or there's something called test flexible. But the biggest group of schools right now are definitely those test optional schools where you do not need scores and you are not penalized. We know this from the data from this year. We weren't sure what was going to happen, but we know from the data this year that students were not penalized for not submitting test scores. In fact, Cornell's first group, so their ED, their early decision group, over 30% of the students who are accepted into the ED group were test optional, meaning they did not, and they didn't submit their test scores. So right there, we know students have a chance without submitting test scores. But again, might be different student to student, depending on the kind of schools they're looking for. So definitely not a blanket statement. It's not Amy saying no one has to take a test, but your child now has options in terms of testing or doing test prep. The one thing I say to families all the time on your activities list or like your resume, and we're going to talk about that in a second, you cannot write test prep. So if your child plays soccer, they can say they played soccer. They can say that they babysat. They can say they had a summer job as a lifeguard. They can even say they went to an amazing summer camp, but you cannot write on there you did test prep. And what we're finding and what we've seen historically is students are spending 10 plus hours a week doing test prep. Imagine if your child had those 10 hours back to do an activity, to learn to play an instrument, to just read a book they wanted to read. Like that actually is much more useful time, and colleges are much more excited about that than this endless cycle of test prep. So
Amy,
yes.
We have a question
Yes.
that I want to read. Hello. AP classes and dual enrollment classes at a community college are both weighted. Are they weighted the same? Would Amy recommend an AP class or dual enrollment?
So that's a great question. And for those who don't know what dual enrollment is, some high schools in the United States will offer a class that is, you get college credit for it while you're taking it at your high school. And in some instances, you will even take it through the college. So it could be an online class. You actually go to the college and you're getting high school and college credit for it. So most colleges like both. I know that's not a great answer, but they actually do like both. I'll go back to my original statement, which is, what is your son or daughter most interested in? So for example, if there's an AP US history class that's offered at your high school, and there's also a dual enrollment history class that's offered with the community college, remember with the dual enrollment class, you're going to actually receive college credits. So as a college counselor, I like that. Like, I love that idea of your child getting college credits. There's actually a question on every single college application that says, have you received any college credits? And it's really nice to be able to say yes. So you don't earn college credits from taking an AP class at a high school. Eventually, if you do well enough on the test, and once you decide what college you're going to, many colleges will award credits anywhere, it depends on your score on the test. So sometimes a 4 or 5, usually you'll get college credits for. There's a few schools that'll give credit for a 3 on your score on that test. So the dual enrollment actually is a sure thing. You're actually getting college credits for those that would, in most cases, be able to transfer to a college, and you can say yes that you took those. Some of those dual enrollment classes require something a bit more. And again, colleges are always looking for students who go above and beyond. Now, the second part of that is, I would love to see a student do both, right? So I'd love to see a student taking the AP class that's offered at their high school. And if there was something that was really interesting, maybe to augment, doing the dual enrollment class as well. But every high school in this country is a little bit different in terms of what AP classes are offered, or if even dual enrollment is something that's offered to them. Important for families to know that colleges know what's offered at your high school. I get a lot of questions about, will my son or daughter be penalized because our high school only offers 7 AP classes, right? And my child only could ever take 2 of them. Well, you're not going to be penalized if that's all your school offered, whereas some high schools might offer 25 AP classes. And so colleges do not penalize students based on what's offered to them. There are people in different parts of the country that have less access to resources than other parts of the country. Funding in different school districts can be very different. There's some private schools that don't offer AP classes at all. So again, we're not going to penalize students who never had the opportunity to take those. But so my short answer is I'd love to see the dual enrollment if you're getting the college credit for it, because then you get to say, yes, I got college credit. Okay, good. All right, so we're gonna move on. If you have more questions about that, definitely put them in the chat. Okay, activities. I love activities. This is a fun thing to talk about. Most important, and I always get the question like, what looks good? I hate that question, what looks good on a college application, but I couldn't be a college counselor if I wasn't willing to answer that question. What looks good in terms of classes? What looks good in terms of activities? What looks good in terms of a test score? So what looks good for activities is very, very important. Probably most important is quality over quantity. In fact, on the college application, the Common Application only allows 10 spots for activities for your son or daughter to list. 10. Now, there's other ways you can add some more on there, but the reality is colleges are not looking for your child to be involved in 20 or 30 different activities. That's why there's only 10 spots on the application. I have a great colleague at Collegewise, Nandita. She worked in admissions at Stanford for years. And she said the average number of activities on an activity list of a student who's accepted at Stanford is 6. So they're not even filling up all 10 spots. But those 6 activities are things they do in a big way. So gone are the days of listing that you volunteered at the homeless shelter on Thanksgiving for 2 hours. Once a year. Like, that's embarrassing. I wouldn't let kids write that down. Now, if you volunteered every weekend at the homeless shelter, okay, over the course of a year, you've built out a bunch of hours that you were involved in that. If you were a lifeguard twice in the entire summer for 2 hours, you can't write that down. But if you had a summer job and for 2 or 3 months, you work consistently for 20 hours a week, we're going to write that down, because the quality of the activity, and I'll say quantity in terms of hours, like the amount of time you're putting into something is really important, but we'd rather see fewer activities that you're more invested in versus this massive list. Gone are the days of being well-rounded, like we were told when we were in high school. Colleges are really looking for students to find 1 or 2 areas of significant interest and really putting their time into that. There's a bullet point on here that I love that says hobbies count too, and that is important. I have had kids who list on their activity sheet if they're, voracious readers. I have a girl who read 40 books last summer. That was on her activity list. She loved to read. She also wanted to be a writer. So amazing, because she was a fabulous writer as well, but that was something that was really important to her. Versus I'm in 4 different clubs at my high school that, if we're lucky, meet once a month for an hour. I mean, that's not substantial. That's not that quality over quantity. So really important in terms of activities. And I have some resources for some great ideas if you're looking for ideas for your children and things that they can get involved in. So activities is another way that your child is measured. The transcript, their courses, activities, how do they spend their time? I remind kids Netflix is not an activity you can write on your activity list, although I'm sure all of our children spend too much time on Netflix and YouTube. Not something you can write down. So really thinking about and helping them to brainstorm ways that they're spending their time. Essays, again, a whole webinar, y'all, we could do on essays. But kind of the biggest takeaways of this, and not every college requires students to write an essay. So that's another important piece of this. But essays, really, the biggest rule about essays is we want students to be honest. A huge downfall, and when we first start working with students or even families, parents sometimes have ideas about essays. Oh, we want to write our essay about, going to Africa and setting up these wells. And I'm like, what, why? Like, was that meaningful to you? What's important about that to you? Why is this a story you want to share about yourself? A lot of this, I was the captain of the soccer team and we won the state championship. And okay, that's all kind of trying to impress. None of that is about Why did you do something? What did you get out of it? Why is it important to you? How did you change because of this particular activity? And colleges really, the colleges that have essay questions and that require essay questions, they really use those essays to get to know a student better. And not what's impressive about them. The impressive part of a student is on that transcript with their grades. That's where we need them to be impressive. If you submit test scores, those can be impressive too. But an essay is really the opportunity to just kind of be likable. I call it the roommate test, right? Is this someone that you would want to be your college roommate when you read through it? Is this someone you'd want to actually have a meal with and go out to dinner with? It's a little bit of the litmus test about like, don't be a jerk. Like, don't, and a lot of kids who try to write to be impressive come off like jerks. And I read them and I'm like, this isn't even you. Like, you're so likable and you're so fun and you have this great spirit. That's what we want to try to help students get across in their essays. So again, we can have a whole webinar just about essays, but that's another very important piece of the application.
Amy,
Yeah.
another question from the slide before.
Yeah.
What do pre-college summer programs, how do they get reported on the application, and are they considered activities or in some other category?
That's a good question. We're going to talk about summer activities a little bit later, but to answer the question, depending on the kind of college summer program it is. So some colleges will host summer programs that are what I would consider like a camp, right? So you're not getting college credits, more just the opportunity for a student to be on campus. Maybe you take a class with the professor, but you're not getting actual credit for it. It's a camp, right? It's an interactive kind of educational experience. Maybe to take a class on something you're interested in learning about. I have a bunch of students. Wake Forest does these great like medical camps where kids can go and like dissect stuff and learn about the medical community, but they're not getting college credit for it. They're just on a college campus being taught by a college professor in what I would consider like a less formal way. Which are great, just great experiences for students to be on campus. The other kind are actually where a student can receive college credit. These are actually usually a little bit more expensive because you're paying for the college credit, and students can earn up to 3 or more credits during the summer, actually taking a regular college class being taught by a college professor at that particular school. With COVID, there's a lot of those are happening online as well. Cornell has an amazing summer schedule and different classes that they offer. Again, they're expensive because you're paying for the credits. It's like paying for a semester of college, but students are awarded college credit. So when you're asking the question about, can you put both of those on an activity list? Absolutely, because it's how your child is spending their time. What looks better, what looks good, are the ones where a child actually is getting college credit. And those there's not as many of those programs. But again, it goes back to that. You're receiving college credit. You're showing you're willing to go kind of above and beyond. Hopefully you have some kind of academic interest or kind of career interest in why you're taking that particular class. So they're not all created equal. The other thing I want to say is a lot of times parents and students will choose to take a class at a college that they might be interested in, hoping it's going to give them a better chance at getting admitted. And the reality is a lot of those summer programs that are offered on college campuses are not connected whatsoever with the admissions office. They literally have nothing to do with it. It's a revenue generating opportunity for a college to have students on campus. So understand that those are not tied to admissions at all. But what is nice, and this is gonna lead us into our next slide, which is matchmaking, is colleges are trying to figure out who's gonna be a great fit for their community. And if you have a student, for example, who spent, 4 weeks on the Wake Forest campus in North Carolina and can talk about being on campus, can talk about a particular professor, can talk about the, science labs that they were in, then that idea of fit becomes that much more important. And so while it doesn't give you a leg up in the admissions process, it gives you a leg up in the matchmaking process, because a student should then be able to talk about in an interview, in an essay, in a short answer question from a college, why they feel like they're such a good fit. And we all know if your son or daughter spends time on a college campus, they're going to be more familiar with kind of the vibe on that campus. Even though most summer programs are full of high school students, hopefully there's some interaction with a professor or things like that. So they're not all created equal, but yes, you can list those on your activity list. I usually say to families, the order that we put things on an activity list is important. Those usually head towards the bottom, just because, again, a lot of the opportunities on college campuses are what we call pay to play, meaning that if you have money and you pay your money, your child can go to that campus and get the credits, or go to that campus and have that college experience. They're not actually selective programs for the most part. So again, they're going to fall a little bit lower on that priority list of activities for sure. But yeah.
Somebody asked about the Johns Hopkins Gifted and Talented Summer Program.
Yes. Amazing. Yes. Amazing program. Again, at the most highly selective schools, lots of students are doing the Gifted and Talented program. So yes, important. Yes, it would be listed on your application. Many of those classes, again, you can take a lot of those classes for credit that are either listed on your high school transcript or could be listed separately on your application under the additional information section. Colleges are very familiar with the Johns Hopkins program. It's very prestigious. It's, they don't just take anyone. You have to be invited, you have to be accepted into that program. And so yes, that absolutely can be listed on your application as well. And usually kids need more space than what's listed on the activity list. So there's a kind of a separate kind of write-in section, and that would be included there just because most people would take more than 1 or 2 classes. And so those would be listed. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of matchmaking, and that's being on campus can really help. Matchmaking is very important to colleges. As parents, a lot of times we're hyper focused on the selectivity of a college. So what's their acceptance rate? If a college has a 4% acceptance rate, 3 or 4% acceptance rate like Stanford, then it must be the best college in the country. Well, Stanford's an amazing school, but probably not the best fit for all of your kids. Definitely not the best fit for both of my kids. So acceptance rate doesn't necessarily mean the best. Colleges are they're most concerned with the yield number. So the yield number is the number of students who are offered admission versus the number of students who applied and who actually decides to come to that school. So just to give you an idea, Harvard has one of the highest yield rates, which is 88%. Okay, now that may surprise people because people may say, oh, if my kid got into Harvard, they're going there. Well, 12% of the kids who get into Harvard say no to Harvard. They probably end up at like MIT or Yale or something. But that yield rate is very important for colleges because they're trying to figure out how many people do we have to offer admission to in order to fill our freshman class. And that's why fit is so important for them. That is why they're trying to figure out who's going to say yes to them, who's going to be the best fit on our campus. Very important. And it's a piece of this puzzle that I think a lot of students and families just kind of ignore because you're so focused on your side of the process. But remember, these are colleges with institutional priorities. They're trying to figure out what's going to make the most sense for them. Do they want to increase diversity on their campus? Do they need to increase the number of male versus female students? Do they need more nursing majors? Do they need more math majors? What is it that they're looking for? And so that matchmaking becomes very, very important for them as they're looking at applications. Okay. So this is kind of my little Cliff's Notes kind of version when we, instead of, of course, good grades and okay, but let's talk about some real meat here. What are colleges looking for? Meaningful, sustained community service. That means being involved and engaged in your community in some important way. Again, that is not the one and done, I volunteered 2 times kind of opportunity. That is, if you have a younger child and they can get involved in some kind of service or engagement in their community, it could be even just involved in their synagogue or their church for all 4 years of high school. That checks this box in a big way. So meaningful, sustained community service, doing something where you're engaged. Collective action that takes on community challenges. So again, doesn't mean all of our children are going to be activists, but like someone who's really engaged in what's going on in the world, in their community, and who's actually doing something about that. This is, again, these most selective schools. These are kind of the big topics for them. Authentic, meaningful experiences with diversity. And again, what does that look like? Some of these can be combined. This doesn't mean these are 3 separate things. This could all be one activity that we're talking about right now, but where there's some exposure to really engaging in ideas of diversity. And that can mean many different facets. I love this. Service that develops gratitude and a sense of responsibility for the future. These all feel like very big things. But you guys want to know who gets in? These are the kids who get in to these most highly selective schools. Really owning and not just existing, but kind of really owning their place in society is important, and talking about that. Contributions to one's family. I have a great student I worked with a few years ago, and he actually wrote his college essay about single parent situation. And he actually wrote his college essay about his role in the family. And that wasn't just in terms of making sure his younger siblings got to school in the morning. His mom worked a night shift, but also in terms of financial responsibility to the family, which was very, very impressive. And this was in a big way. And it's interesting, we talk about his essay. He could have written about a million things that were very impressive, but he talked about this sense of responsibility that he had to his family. So very important. Colleges love to see this on their activity list. It starts with asking your kids to unload the dishwasher for you, but again, we'd love to see them take it, a couple steps further. Very, very important. So next time you can say to your child, you should unload the dishwasher. It's good for your college applications. Like, just be a part of what's going on. Assessing students' daily awareness of and contributions to others. Like, how are you engaged in your school community? How are you engaged on your soccer team or on the football team, or in the library where you volunteer? How are you engaged? You don't just show up, but you're actually involved in what's going on. I say to students a lot of times, these are the kids who we call them high impact kids, right? If they didn't show up, people would notice they weren't there. It doesn't mean you have to be the top scorer, on the lacrosse field. It doesn't mean that you are the student body president, but it means that people notice, your teachers notice when you're not in class because you're not helping the discussion move along, or bringing up an opposing viewpoint. It's those kids are what we call high impact kids, and colleges love these kids. They fight over these kids. And we talked about this before, which are activities, prioritizing quality, not quantity. Very, very important. So again, as you're thinking of your own son or daughter and all these little bullet points, figuring out kind of where they fall in that continuum is important. Okay, so people always say to me, well, how are colleges going to know this stuff? So I actually took a screenshot to show you what the counselor and teacher recommendations look like. And I literally highlighted at the bottom, it says the applicant's academic talk about the applicant's academic, extracurricular, and personal characteristics. Remember those characteristics we just read about, those bullet points? This is what they're talking about. Colleges don't need a teacher or a counselor to say they got an A in my class, or they're the high school valedictorian. They can see that on their transcript. They want to know what personal characteristics this particular applicant has that make them so important to your community. The teacher evaluation, again, please write whatever you think is important about the student, including a description of academic and personal characteristics as demonstrated in your classroom, right? So again, it's not enough for your child just to show up. They need to raise their hand. They need to participate in discussions. They need to go in for extra help, even if they don't have a question. Talk to the teacher about a book that he or she assigned to them. Share, I had one student recently who I said, oh, that's so cool. She goes, there's a TikTok video about something for the AP US history exam. Like, someone made like a study thing on TikTok. I said, you should email that to your teacher. That's a very cool thing that your teacher probably doesn't even know exists. That's a great way to stay, engaged with your teacher, letting them know you're excited about what they're learning about. And this, which I love, there's actually a rating scale. And this is something students never see. But this is what the teachers and the school counselors actually have to fill out about your child. And the list goes academic achievement, intellectual promise, quality of writing, creative original thought, productive class discussions, respect accorded by faculty, discipline, work habits, maturity, motivation, leadership, integrity, reaction to setbacks, concern for others, self-confidence, initiative, independence, and overall. And if you notice across the top of the board, it starts at below average, average, good, very good, excellent, top 10, outstanding, top, I have to move my picture, top 5, and then one of the top few I've encountered ever, 1%. Now, again, as an educator, as a former high school college counselor, there are very few who ever hit that top 1%. I would say in my entire career of 20 years, I maybe have had 5 of those kids who, and I would say would fall in that top 1% in any of these categories. So again, your child can have the best grades and the best test scores and be doing all the right things, but those teachers and their school counselor have to be able to see that. They have to be able to know that those things are happening, because they're the ones who are filling out these rating scales. So again, fascinating. We always show this to our students that we work with because they have no idea. They think there's this arbitrary, like, what's my teacher going to say about me? I got an A in their class. No, we're looking at these personal characteristics to really get a sense, and for the colleges to get a sense about what kind of student you are, what kind of learner you are. Okay, this goes back to what our college is looking for. This is in reference, I talked about at the very beginning, the Making Caring Common project through the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. There was this huge project that was done. There's this amazing research. There's websites you can go and look at. And there's a massive list of all the college admissions offices who have bought into this research that Harvard did about, like, who are the students you're taking, who are the students you're most excited about? And again, it goes back to these characteristics we just talked about. So it's fascinating research. Again, we could talk all night just about that. I pulled out some snippets because I thought this was important. Now, if anyone who knows me knows, I work with students from all, and at Collegewise, we work with students, again, with a 1.5 GPA to a 4.8 GPA and everything in between. Why I've pulled out some of these more highly selective colleges is because this is what a lot of people have on their mind, and this applies across the board. But if I said to you that XYZ community college really cares about citizens and citizen leaders, no one's going to listen to me. But when I tell you that Harvard really cares about citizens and citizen leaders, everybody perks up. So I've listed on here and highlighted from Cornell to Harvard, Dartmouth, Chapel Hill, Emory, the buzzwords. What is it that they are looking for? What are the questions that they're asking students on their actual applications? These are actual application questions that students have to respond to. And as you can see, there's a thread here, right? Even at Chapel Hill, tell us about a peer who has made a difference in your life. I'm going to learn a lot about a student depending on who they choose there. Emory, in the age of social media, what does engaging with integrity look like for you? Dartmouth, the thing I imagine myself being in the future doesn't exist yet. Can you relate? Like, just fascinating, these questions. And if you're looking at this and you're saying, as some students do to me, they're like, I don't even know what they're asking. I'm like, okay, now we're going to talk about fit, because if you don't even understand the question that University of Washington is asking, this might not be a good fit school for you, right? Like, these questions, they require thought, they require some brainstorming, but they shouldn't be impossible for students to answer. And so again, just to give parents a sense of, whoa, these are the kind of things my kids are going to have to actually be responding to. Colgate, your commitment, talk about, reflect on an experience that demonstrates your commitment to inclusion and diversity. Again, we talked about that earlier in terms of creating and finding experiences where you can include diversity and diversity education and what your child is doing. Very important to colleges. Again, these all go back to those institutional priorities. Every school is looking for something a little bit different that's really going to fulfill the mission and who they are as an institution. So again, all our kids are very different. That's why we're lucky. There's over, 2,300 colleges to choose from. Okay. So now, all the things colleges are looking for. Summer makes a difference, right? As parents, we're stressing out, what are our kids going to do this summer? Last summer, lots was shut down. Our conversations look very different. And so I kind of put this question out there in terms of what is going to be most impressive to colleges, like what looks good. Remember this question everybody asks. So attending a Harvard summer school class, B, working part-time bagging groceries at a local grocery store, C, taking a cooking class and learning how to make pasta from scratch. Sorry about my spacing. D, attending a summer service program in Costa Rica. E, going to summer camp. So, time is important. So I'm just going to answer it for you. The answer is any of these. There is not a right answer here. Any of these things could be impressive to colleges. It's how your child talks about it. It's what they get from this particular experience and how they're going to be able to communicate that to the colleges at the end of the day. All of these things are equally impressive. So if you don't want to spend $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 on an expensive summer program or summer class, Yes, it's just as impressive for your child to have a job. In fact, colleges love students who have a job. It's one of, I would say it's the easiest thing kids can do is get a job. Every college loves a student with a job. Again, if you love cooking and you want to learn more about cooking and making pasta, cool, because you're going to be able to talk to me about that like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You want to go to Costa Rica and do a summer program and you learn a ton from that, amazing. If you're not interested in Costa Rica, probably you shouldn't do that, right? If my child is over soccer, and I probably shouldn't send them to a soccer summer camp, right? Like again, it's about how are you going to spin and how are you going to connect this? How is your child going to be able to connect this to what they're most interested in? And so this is my little slide. I actually copied and pasted this from our Collegewise summer planning guide. And I'm going to talk to you guys about how you can have access to all of our free resources. But I love this because it was kind of this snippet that's like, what is important to you? Right. And there's a line that says, it's a great way to learn. And there isn't a college admissions officer in the world who will look at your list of accomplishments and say, it looks like Johnny took too much initiative in high school. We're not looking for that at Stanford, right? Like, anything where your child is taking initiative, anything that they choose to do this summer that shows initiative, that shows interest, that can even identify and connect it all with any of those characteristics we talked about is going to be impressive for colleges. In that Collegewise summer guide that I talked to you about, there's actually 3 or 4 pages, just a list of all the different summer activities that students at Collegewise do. So it's a great thing if you're looking for ideas, you can access it directly on our website, which is great. Just sometimes parents just need ideas to throw out to their kids. I say, share the link with them, print out the pages, highlight a few things that might be interesting for them. And you'll see the varied on that list. It varies so much in terms of what students have done. Okay, I know we're getting to the end. I'm going to be mindful of time. So just a few more slides. This is my little litmus test / questionnaire for parents. And a lot of this has to do with a lot of kids I meet put a ton of pressure on themselves, that most parents like with the best of intentions and zero pressure at all. But for most of the kids we see, they're, we're anxious. I'm a parent, we're anxious about stuff. And so I have this little questionnaire and I want you to take a look at it and see how many of these you might check. So the first one, if I'm going to read it to you quickly. So if you can't see, during dinner conversations, do you talk frequently about your child's grades and college applications, often forgetting to ask your child what he or she finds interesting and fun about school? Do you encourage your child to do certain community service projects that he or she is not interested in because you think these projects will be helpful for his or her college application? That's a huge no-no. If you're doing anything, please stop doing that. That's very bad for kids. Do you sometimes pressure your child to engage in substantial college preparation while they're on vacation, like intensely studying vocabulary cards or math problems, instead of ensuring he or she has ample time to relax or play? And do you visit and talk about primarily highly selective colleges with your child rather than a wide variety of colleges, including less selective ones? And so the idea here is we don't want you to check any of these things. Again, going back to that research from Harvard and the Making Caring Common, we know when these things happen over time, it actually kind of chips away and makes these actually less desirable applicants when they're applying to college. They're just not able to connect. They're not able to write essays. Their teachers aren't able to say the amazing things we need them to say when these things become very commonplace. And I know Michelle's going to talk about some ways that S4 is working to help families to not get caught up in those traps. And again, a little tip sheet that, again, we'll email this to you guys so everyone will have a chance to look at these. But print this out, put it on your refrigerator. I have it on mine. It's a nice little reminder. I don't need it. My husband needs this because he loves to emphasize grades and things like this. So we're a little bit opposite that way, but definitely take a look at this list because I think there's some great tips on here for families and for parents. And again, this is focusing on your strengths, not your weaknesses. Don't treat college admissions process as though it's life or death. I promise there's life after college for sure. Remember, the name of the college you attend has almost nothing to do with your future success. Much research on that. You can just Google the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, not a list of familiar colleges, I promise. And I always say to kids, you have to enjoy high school. You only get to do this one time. And we want them the happier, the more adjusted, the less stressed out they are. Oh, those are the best kids to work with. They have the best outcomes in the college process for sure. Whew. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. So here's a slide with some information about how you can connect with Collegewise if that's something you're interested in. You can go on our website, collegewise.com. It's hidden. So here's a secret, you guys. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, collegewise.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a little box that says free resources. And if you click on that, it will link to newsletters, free seminars, resources, our college summer guide. There's a guide to visiting colleges. All this stuff is free. They're all PDFs. You can click on them. You can download them. If you're interested in learning more about working with a college counselor at Collegewise, we offer free 30-minute introductory meetings. And I've given the contact information here for Andrea Johnson, who's our program advisor. She has access to our calendars and can set that up for families who are interested in that. And then lastly, as I want to segue over to Michelle, and then if there's questions, or I know we're late on time, but if people want to stick around and have questions, we can talk about those. I work for a national company, but I'm here locally in Westport, Connecticut, and I have just had the pleasure of learning and knowing about Michelle and S4 over the last few years. And the work she's doing is tremendous. And what's most important for me as a college counselor is, in addition to all the stuff we talked about tonight, making sure students are getting the support they need throughout high school, preparing for high school, so that when it comes time to apply for and submit applications, we shouldn't be relearning things. And so definitely, I know Michelle's going to share some information about her services and programs, tutoring, writing help, learning about study skills. I know my daughter is going to be taking advantage of her study skills program as well, because no one's teaching our kids these things by the time they get to high school and throughout high school. We don't want our kids going off to college, not knowing how to study, not knowing how to take notes, not knowing how to write. Oh, Michelle, if you could teach all the high school kids how to write, I would just give you my next born child. Because that's a huge issue. And we see that when it comes time for essay writing. If you're thinking about this, the summer their kids are submitting their college applications, it's too late. So I know she's going to share some information about S4 and how they can help families.
So Amy, thank you so much, everybody. I told you Amy was a gifted speaker, and I wasn't making that up. You heard it and saw it for yourself. I just want to give you a couple of ideas of what you can do to carry on the conversation. We've been offering for the last several months guided conversations around your student study practice and how we can support them. Typically, this group is limited to 10 people in a very intimate kind of a setting. It's every other Thursday at 12:30 for an hour. And this week, Amy has agreed to join us and will answer your questions. If you're interested, you need to register, and you can take a screenshot of this and or put it in the chat, and I will register you, your name, where you live, and you'll get the Zoom link. And then the next slide, Amy, I think you have to do the next. Thank you. So for those of you that have asked, and I've gotten lots of questions throughout this webinar, what do we do and what can we do for your student? Well, we can do one-on-one customized tutoring depending on their age and their grade. We will adapt, and we will adapt to study skills, time management, organization, executive functioning, note-taking, test prep, self-advocacy, which Amy mentioned is so important to your child and to their exact needs. And then we also offer this summer 2 workshops. One is essential study skills and one is essential reading and writing. We're offering them online, and we have 1 class each for middle school and high school. And we also are offering 1 session in person in Darien, Connecticut. So if you're interested, which these classes are usually sold out, but this year, because we're doing it online, we want a small and intimate group, so we're limiting to 6 students, and many of those workshops are already almost full. So don't wait. If you have a question, send me a text and I'll be happy to answer. So with that, Amy, shall we just answer some of the—
Sure. I think
okay.
that's great.
Great. So one of the questions here is, my son was a straight A student until March of last year, and his grades have significantly dropped ever since. What should I do about that? Where can I get support?
Yeah, no, that's a great, and we don't know how old the student is, her son. We don't know what grade her student's in. No.
Ninth grade.
Oh, ninth grade. Okay, ninth grade. So here's a student who did really well in middle school, and then it sounds like got to high school and things kind of like fell off. So I guess the first thing I would say, and I don't know how much you've done of this, but the first thing always I would say would be to reach out to your child's teachers and then their school counselor, just to get a sense of, is this happening consistently across the board? Is it just one or two of the classes? Is there something else going on at the school? Again, teenagers are very complex beings. Their brains are crazy developing very, very quickly. And when we see a massive decrease in grades and drop in grades, sometimes there's something else going on. So that would be my first kind of line of defense, would reach out to the teachers and the school counselor. And then after that, usually you can get some kind of guidance in terms of what's going on. Teachers are great about giving feedback, maybe not all of them, but if you can get to a handful of the teachers, even by sending an email and say what's going on, you'll probably get some advice about what is happening. Is your child just really having trouble with test taking? Are they not taking notes during class? Because I don't know how to even take notes. Again, great thing to reach out to Michelle about. Are they not turning in assignments? Is it too overwhelming, just the organization of high school and staying organized in terms of what has to happen and when assignments are due? Usually it's not everything across the board, right? In most instances we see with students, it's one of these issues. They're not great at note taking. They're not organized. Maybe they're not great at studying for the test. Maybe they're turning in assignments late. And so figuring out what that is and kind of working on one step at a time, that would be my advice. And then definitely, again, Michelle's a great resource. I have found with some of my students that have worked with her tutors, it's that accountability factor. And I don't know about you guys, our children do not listen to us. I mean, my big joke is I can't even help my own kids with their college process. One of my colleagues will be helping my children because they don't listen to me. And so sometimes just having another person who can come in and kind of be that consistent, hey, let's go through your planner. Let's figure out when your assignments are due. Let's talk about when your test is coming up. When do you need to start studying? Unfortunately, we don't teach study skills to kids. And so there's a big transition between 8th grade and into high school for a lot of kids. And just to hopefully make you feel a little bit better, there's a lot of colleges out there who don't count 9th grade grades when they're looking at the entire transcript. They look at 9th grade as almost a transition year. So don't advertise that to your kids. That's not every college across the board, but there are a lot of schools that realize that's a transition year. Again, if something's going on at home, maybe it's just understanding about, high school is more difficult than middle school. That's okay, and kind of owning that. So don't worry, even if there's a blip in 9th grade or even 10th grade, we can always explain those things in applications and when you submit your applications. But definitely reach out to the school. That would be my first call. And then kind of secondary is follow up in terms of getting some maybe specific one-on-one help for what he needs. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I have another one here. A student has a low grade on last year's AP test. Was part of the College Board COVID fiasco with their technical problems. Should she try to retake the test this year? Pros, a second chance to get a higher grade. Cons, the material is not fresh and she has other AP tests to take.
Yeah, I mean, again, without knowing the entire situation, I'm going to vote no on retaking that AP test. And this is why. Because there's not a college out there that requires AP tests. Not one single college requires them. I talk to kids about AP tests, and this is a great question because many of them are starting this week. You should think of AP test as like sprinkles on top of an ice cream sundae, right? I'm happy to have an ice cream sundae, but I don't need the sprinkles, right? So colleges are going to be more concerned about the grade your child got in that AP class last year on their transcript than the score on the AP test. That's her choice to submit that score or not. And if she didn't do very well, I wouldn't submit that one test from last year. Especially, as you said, she has new AP tests that are coming up, and those are much more important. And those are the ones we want her to focus on. If, again, in the application process, we felt like, oh, this is weird, there's one we didn't include, and you wanted to explain that, trust me, every college is frustrated with the College Board and what happened with testing last year. So it would be easily explained. I would say stay focused on what she's doing now. Stay focused on her test now, doing well in the test now. And remember, it's always your child's choice about whether or not to submit AP test scores. And as I said before, unless they get a 4 or 5, I don't let kids put them on their application because it's never going to help them. We want the sprinkles on top. If not, don't include it.
Here's another question. How can a child find inspiration, motivation to study and do their best? What if a parent never does any of the things you listed? The child will wind up just watching Netflix or playing video games.
Yes, 100%. And again, we talked about the ideal tonight, right? The ideal situation is your son or daughter is getting involved in something, ticking all those boxes, everything we talked about tonight, getting involved in their community, finding a true love of learning. That would be amazing, but that's not going to be all of our children. So we want to help to find them, introduce them to things that they're interested in. And sometimes it's just providing opportunities and sometimes it's helping them. Please don't do this for your child. If you do not have a child who's a self-starter, who's going to do this stuff on their own, yes, it's okay to introduce and help to provide, but we don't want you doing it for them. I've had parents reach out to me and say, well, I filled out 3 applications for her for jobs. She's just so busy. I'm like, oh my, please don't do that. Like your child should fill out their own job application, right? Like they can send their own emails, they can do all that stuff. So as much as you can provide, just as you would, if they were interested in playing soccer, for example, and you're like, hey, do you want to go outside and kick the ball with me? Right? Like we want to try to get them engaged in what's going on, showing them stuff. Maybe if there's a cool job posting or an interesting summer program you think they would like, maybe sitting down and saying, hey, listen, like in our family, it's important we do something. These are our values. Netflix is not a value for us. Like, so we would love you to do something this summer. Do you have any ideas about that? Maybe brainstorm with them and say, we came up with a couple of ideas. Here's 3 things we found that we think you would really like that we're happy to support you in doing. Let's talk about this and figure this out together. So as much as you can kind of bring your child along in the process, but for a lot of these kids, sometimes it's just introducing an idea. And that's why, again, that Collegewise summer guide is so important because I think there's just this massive list of just different things, programs, and hobbies and fun things that kids have done in order to fill their time during the summer, during COVID. So kind of getting started, that's our responsibility as parents. And if you really have a child who's reluctant to doing anything, that's okay. You guys, there are colleges for every single kind of student out there. But that's when I say to parents, you have to have it, this is when you've got to look inward and say, maybe my child doesn't really show a love of learning. Maybe my child doesn't really want to get engaged with what's going on in our community. Maybe our child's not really, he's not a 4.0 student. So a little bit of this is having some understanding about where your child is. And that goes back to finding that best fit, not just in college, but also in summer programs as well. Yeah.
So here's another question to that from Jennifer. How would you recommend students learn about different career paths, any career fairs? What about internships or how to find them?
Yeah. So first of all, if your school has Naviance has some amazing resources. If you don't know what that is, it's actually a software that school districts contract and pay for. And they're used in the college application process. In the Northeast, many of our schools use this. It's very common in the Northeast. There's something also called SCORE that some other schools use as well, very similar. But on that, every single one of your children, if your school has Naviance, has a username and password so they can log in there. You can use their information to go in. There's whole career exploration inventories. There's videos about different careers and different things that people do. So that's a good resource that your school districts are probably paying for. Anyway, so that's a good start. The other thing is, this is going to sound really silly, but Google, many times when I'm working with a student, we'll actually go through some of things that they're interested in and actually learn about different careers. Start watching videos. YouTube is an amazing resource, again, for videos about different careers. A lot of times this is having a conversation with someone and trying to figure out what they're most interested in. I had a student once come to me and say he only wanted to apply to engineering schools. And the more we talked about it, I looked at his math classes. He was not in a high math class. He actually the more we talked, he hated math and science. He actually really wanted to write, but his dad told him that engineers made a lot of money and he really wanted to make a lot of money. And I was like, oh, we're going to start over here. Right. And so he really had no sense of what an engineer even did. He didn't realize that math was involved in engineering. And, the more we learned about it and I showed him very quickly, he realized maybe that wasn't the best path for him. So we did a lot of brainstorming about other things that would make more sense for him. There's not a great one resource for kind of career exploration. I wish there was. That would be a great thing if someone came up with this. There's a lot of, you can go online and pay to take tests and do what we call like an interest inventory. But a lot of times what we find with those is students are told, oh, you would be great in a helping profession. Well, that list is endless, right? Or you would be great in the medical field. But again, there's a big difference between being a doctor or being a home health aide, right? Or being a researcher. So for a lot of those, they're very, very vague. And for some kids, it's just learning about all the different things that they're involved. I also love a lot of college websites. If you look up particular majors at a school, they will actually say people who study XYZ get involved in these kinds of careers, or these are the kind of jobs or internships that our students do. So that's another way where kids are learning about colleges, but also learning about different jobs and internships and things like that. As a college counselor, I think internships are fascinating for most kids. The problem is what we see a lot of times is it ends up being, oh, my dad's friend is an orthopedic surgeon and I did an internship for a week. No, you didn't. You just followed the guy around for a week. And then kids want to write it on their college application. That's not that. Remember that quality we talked about? That is not quality. That's just exposure and learning about something, which is great. And those opportunities are wonderful. But please don't think if your child does a bunch of those kind of internships that they're going to write that on their college application, because any great college counselor would never allow that ever for that to happen. But anything that's going to expose your child to new information, to new experiences, to different ways that people live and learn, those are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Amy, we have a question. Do colleges really read the essays?
That is a great question. It depends. Oh, that's the worst answer in college admissions. I know there is so much gray. It's not funny, you guys. It's awful. As college counselors, we wish they made this process easier for families, but there is so much gray. So here's the reality. If you have a college, say, for example, Clemson University, let's talk about Clemson. Clemson on average receives anywhere from 25,000 applications a year. They have an admissions staff and they can't read every single one of those applications, right? There's just not enough hours in the day. And so there's a little bit of a funnel that happens at most of these colleges, especially the bigger universities that receive so many applications. And it may be as simple as a GPA cutoff, right? So anyone with below a 3.0 GPA, we're going to put in a separate file, right? And we're only going to that's an example. We're only going to focus on the kids that have higher than 3.0 GPA. I would say at a school like Princeton or Yale, for example, if you don't have at least a 3.5, they're not reading your essay. You could have the best essay in the world, but if your GPA is that low or you don't have the rigor in your classes, they're not going to take time to read your letters of recommendation and your essay, because there's nothing you're probably going to say that's going to be so compelling that you're going to get one of those, very coveted spots at those schools. And so the answer is no. Not every essay is going to be read at every single school. They've got to funnel these out somehow. There are some bigger schools. Penn State's a great example of this. They don't even require an essay. You can submit it if you want, but it's not required. So again, how many of those essays are actually read? That's a big question mark that we just don't know. To give you a sense of this year in admissions, because we saw numbers doubling at most schools in terms of applications. I told you Clemson had, I think it was 23,000 applications, kind of traditionally. This last year, they had 48,000 applications at Clemson. Clemson did not hire any more people to work in their admissions office this year. So they had almost double the amount of applications and the same number of staff people. So I'm going to guarantee at Clemson, they weren't reading all those essays this year. They just couldn't. They just physically could not have done that. I say that doesn't mean you don't have to do a great job on the entire application, because at some of the smaller schools, Absolutely. They're reading every word of every essay of every letter of recommendation. So again, depends on the type of school that your child's applying to. Yeah.
Amy, we have a great question from Mimi. How do you present a CB student whose resume is chock full of volunteering, working, and sports instead of A's in school? Does an IEP hurt if you're upfront about having one?
Oh, great questions. Okay, so let's start first of all about the grades and the activities. I love a student. I love a BC student who's been involved in a ton of stuff, because there's probably a lot of people who are willing to vouch for that particular student, between the school counselor, maybe even a club advisor, a coach, or something like that, who's going to tell me about how wonderful this child is, right? And so that's wonderful. But again, we would want a BC student to be realistic about the kind of colleges that they're applying to. If your child is a BC student, we probably don't want them going to the most highly selective colleges in the country, because that's a student who's, if they're a BC student, probably traditionally hasn't maybe figured out how to study or really found that passion or love of learning. And so we're actually putting those kids at a disadvantage by having them apply to some of those most competitive colleges. The best way for me to describe this is, for example, Middlebury, an amazing school in Vermont, small liberal arts school in Vermont. To get into Middlebury, you probably have to take an AP English class for the most part. I'm sure there's kids out there who haven't, but for the most part, there's an expectation. If you're going to Middlebury, you've taken AP Lit, AP Lang, maybe both. Now, if my child were to apply to Middlebury and let's say got in, maybe I knew someone or gave a gazillion dollars and my child was going to get into Middlebury, but she never took an honors English class. Ooh, we've just handicapped her, right? We've just actually put her at a disadvantage, because she's going to go sit in her freshman English class and they're going to talk about books that they read or papers that they've written. And she never did that. So now we've actually hurt this child, right? So again, the level where they are academically is really important in terms of the kind of schools that they should be applying to, making sure that it's a good fit. I say to kids all the time, you want to be at the top of your class. You don't want to be the one at the bottom of your class. You don't want to be scraping by and clawing your way through, stuck in the library or stuck in your dorm room, having zero social life because you're so far behind academically. So that's in that case with a BC student who's done a lot of stuff, there are tons of colleges out there who would love a student like that. But it's not going to be those most highly selective schools, which is perfectly okay. The second part of your question, Mimi, was about an IEP and should you disclose that? Again, that's a whole webinar, which I would love to do, to talk to families with students with IOPs and with kids with IEPs and 504s. So those are students who receive some kind of accommodations or in special education in high school for various reasons. That is a really personal decision in terms of disclosing. What I would say with an IEP, that's an individualized education plan, if you're not aware, there are very specific schools that have programs that are massively supportive for students who are in special education. And that's actually a part of their application process. Now, that doesn't mean everyone with an IEP has to disclose. That's personal information to share with a school. But if you don't disclose in the application process, it can actually hurt you, because colleges are smart. And on a transcript, you can see the kind of classes a student has taken. If you have a child who's been in a study skills class at their high school or who's in a resource, right? Those are all kind of, those are classes for students who have needed some extra support and help throughout high school. So if you don't actually own up to the fact of that on your application, it leaves a lot of question marks for the admissions people. If you don't have any of that information on a transcript, if it's hidden or it's not disclosed on a transcript, then that becomes a decision you get to make as a family, whether or not you want to share that information. However, talk to a college counselor, talk to the school counselor at your child's high school to make sure you're applying to schools that are going to be supportive of a student who does have an IEP. Because if your child needs accommodations, by law, they're required to receive them in a public high school. They are not required by law to receive those in a college. And colleges do not have to honor IEPs and 504s. It's not the rule once they get into college. So please make sure your child's going to a school that will support that. And most reputable colleges do, but there's some that are much better than others. Again, on our Collegewise website, I'd say we have great resources for students who are in special education and actually giving some suggestions about some schools. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely look at that for sure. Yeah.
So we have, I think this is the last question unless somebody else dings me.
Perfect.
What does Collegewise, so what does Collegewise's support program and planning look like? And the cost if we wanted to get started with our 7th grader?
Okay. So if you have a 7th grader, it's too early. That's what I'm going to say to you. At Collegewise, we really don't start working with families until they get to 8th grade. And the reason being is because I'm going to put this contact information up here again. The reason being is because really in middle school, and I've even had parents reach out to me in 5th grade, and I'm like, they need to be in school, doing schoolwork, doing their homework, getting organized, hook up with Michelle with study skills, learning how to be a good student, learning how to write. Those are the things you can be doing in middle school. When we start talking to families in 8th grade, usually it's kind of the second half of 8th grade when we start to talk about course selection for high school. So Collegewise, really, our programs are really focused on, it's kind of 8th grade and throughout high school is when we like to work with students. And so how do you do that? The easiest way to do it, you can go to our website. I have direct information to Andrea Johnson. She's who I work with, very closely. She has access to my schedule and the other counselors in our Collegewise office in Westport to our schedules. So she schedules all of our introductory meetings with families and can talk to you about programs and pricing. And we offer everything from free seminars and free webinars to hourly packages for families who might just need help with a college list. We have essay packages for kids who just need help with essays. And then we have full programs, our complete admissions programs, which literally we hold hands throughout the entire process, all throughout high school, and help with, students and families submitting applications. So the one thing I'll say about Collegewise is we put a lot of onus back on students. Our counselors work with students. Of course, we talk to parents. I talk to parents every single day and email with parents, but we really push students to own this process. And so Collegewise maybe isn't the best fit for every family. That's something that's really important to us. We want students to do the work. We don't write essays for kids. We don't fill out applications for them. We'll look at them. We'll make sure everything's proofread and ready to go before they hit submit, but we do not do the work for students. I remind kids all the time, parents say to me, oh my gosh, thank you, got my kid into whatever school. I'm like, I did not get anyone into any, like they have to get themselves into the school. We're here as a support and to walk alongside you in this journey, make sure you have the information that you need. But really we put a lot of onus back on our students. So if you want to reach out to Andrea directly, or you can go to our Collegewise website, that's probably the best way to get information about what's best for your family. Because we have a whole long old list of range of services. Yeah.
I think this is really going to be the last question. Actually, it's
that's fine. Yeah.
Directed towards me. What's the difference between your workshops and your tutoring services? So the workshops are for students that are up way past their bedtime, that are motivated, and that really need a structure and a process for which to do their work. Those are the students that succeed the best in our workshops. Our tutoring, on the other hand, is totally customized to your student based on their academic work, their learning style, etc. The thing about our tutoring, which is different from our workshop, is that we will reinforce the skills. And Amy said the operative word a little earlier, and that is keep the student accountable. And so we'll take you out of it. So basically you're outsourcing if you're having any kind of meltdowns or challenges with your student listening to you, we will take it on. And our teachers are hired specifically because of their ability to bond with kids. They're all teachers. They're not college students themselves. They've taught in the classroom, and they've had multiple years of experience, and they know the systems, Schoology, Google Classrooms, etc. The interesting thing that we have found this year, maybe Amy, you've seen this also. I know some of you that we work with now that are on this call have seen it as well. And that is the fact that kids are doing the work, but they're not submitting it. Mm-hmm. And we have just seen it this year. We have never seen it at all like we're seeing it now. And I think that's because time management, organization, and executive functioning have become so critical for our kids. And it really became apparent when they started working from home last year in March that they didn't know how to study and they didn't know how to use a planner, because they just thought, why do I need to plan when everything is online? But planning the school calendar online is not going to tell your student when they have soccer practice, when they have an orthodontist appointment, and when they possibly have an away game and they're going to travel and they won't be able to study for the test the night before. So just things to consider. Both are excellent programs, and with the workshops, we offer a ton of templates for note-taking and for test studying and organization, time management, etc., and as well as a lot of written guides. And we offer that too if we are working one-on-one with you. So, choose, you can call me, text me, and if you have a question, I'm happy to walk you through the options. So, oh, one more. What is this? Thank you. Okay. Great. Well, I think we're done, Amy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and I'll look forward to seeing anybody on Thursday who comes to the parent lunch, virtual lunch. I will be there. I'm excited about it. Yeah. Thank you guys.
We're definitely having you back. I'm getting messages. Thank you for this. It was a great program and very informative. Amy is really amazing. I know that. Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you so much for this. Thank you very much. It just goes on and on. So excellent insight. Thank you. So Amy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Touch, Amy.
Definitely. Definitely. Bye.
Okay.